Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at Gamemax's Black Hole. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at Gamemax's Black Hole. This is a ATX addressable RGB PC case with, well, obviously you can see from the front panel we've got two huge fans up front. Now, first of all, I would say because of the style of this case, it isn't going to appeal to everybody, but if you do like the look of 200mm front fans, you do like a little bit of addressable RGB, then this case is going to be right up your street. Now, straight away we should address the fact that there is a solid piece of glass up front here blocking those two 200mm fans. The question is, does it actually make a difference? Well, we'll be finding that out later on in the video, so stay tuned for the charts and graphs a little bit later on. But we're going to go through, do a quick teardown of the case, show you all the pros and cons, go through the features, and then we'll come back at the end with my final thoughts and obviously those all-important temperature tests. So let's start off first of all with a tour of the case. So obviously we've addressed the front section. So this is where we've got our two 200mm addressable RGB fans. These are actually Gamemax's own. They have got the product numbers on the back. They may or may not be available as a separate entity. I haven't found them anywhere for sale at the moment, but potentially they may be. So if you want to replace them, you certainly can do. The front panel itself, like I said, is got this glass, which has got a nice dark type smoke tint to it. There is on the side of the panel, which is relatively easy to take off. So we'll just pull that off now. And the front panel, as you can see, along the sides has got some nice ventilation on the side. It's not entirely open, but certainly there is enough room there to get some air through. The actual side section here is about 40mm, and the fans themselves are somewhere in the region of about 25 to 27mm. So there's about a centimetre of air gap between the front of the glass and the fans themselves. So there is a little bit of room there for them to breathe. As you can see, two huge fans on there. Now, for those of you that are wondering straight away, can you replace these with Noctua's 200mm Beasties? Sadly, you can't. They don't physically fit. I have tried them already. These pretty much are going to be the ones you're going to have to use. You may find some other aftermarket ones fit. Alternatively, if you wanted to, you can actually remove these. There are mountings behind the fans, which is something of a kind of a pro and a con. It does give you the flexibility, but also the mountings do actually block some of the airflow. So that is something we have to take into consideration. But if you want to, you can remove these, put in 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. Radiator support wise for this front section, 360, 280, 240, 140, 120, and yep, that's pretty much it. So if you want to, you can put a 360mm rad in the front, no problems at all. So looking at the actual dimensions of the case, so at the moment we're looking at 440mm tall by 400mm long, obviously 360 if you take away the front panel, and also 210mm wide. So looking at the side section, so we've got a tempered glass side panel. This is a 3mm thick tempered glass sheet. Sadly, there isn't any protective surround or anything kind of edging on it, which is a little bit unfortunate. And it is held on by these 4 removable thumb screws, which are actually relatively easy to get off. They're quite a large size, so that's good. There's rubberized grommets actually on the screws themselves and actually behind the glass. The glass actually rests on a ledge. It's actually quite difficult to get out. It does kind of squeeze in nicely in between the top and the bottom of the actual chassis itself. So taking a closer look inside the PC, you can see we've got plenty of room there. It does fit a ATX motherboard in there very easily. As you can see, we've got one in there already. You can install micro ATX should you wish to, and also ITX. Graphics card wise, lengths up to 340mm, and CPUs you can put in with a maximum height of 170mm, which is actually pretty impressive and is one of the better sizes on the market. There's plenty of pass-throughs for cabling, cable management, all that kind of stuff. The bottom section is completely ventilated and there's some decent pass-throughs through there. So you can get things like your HD audio connector, your USB connections, all that kind of stuff very easily, very easy to manage and access. The same cannot be said for the top section, sadly. Where we're putting through our EPS connector in that top left-hand corner, it's a little bit on the tight side, if I'm completely honest with you. I'd like to have seen this case to be maybe about 1 inch taller and maybe just give a little bit more headroom on the top. Another reason for that is for radiator mountings. Now actually on Gamemax's site and also on the box itself, it does say for water cooling support, it will support up to a 360mm rad on the front, a 280 on the top and a 120 on the back. Now depending on your motherboard and your RAM, clearance potentially could be an issue. Using something like Corsair's LPX RAM and the motherboard we've got in there, which is a Asus X570 Tough gaming board, we could actually put a radiator in there relatively easily, although You will have to be careful if you ever need to get into the top of the RAM slots or any of the connectivity along the top of the motherboard. You will find it a squeeze, and potentially you will need to remove the radiator to actually gain access. But it does support up there, up to 280mm rad. 240s I think would probably be the better option, giving you a little bit more wiggle room. Realistically, because of the amount of airflow coming from these fans on the front, probably just a couple of fans in there if you wanted to, although I did find in my testing with this stock configuration, it actually does do very well anyway. Looking on somewhat of a side angle there, I'll try and get you some better footage of this, but you can see the mounting section behind the 200mm fan. So as is often the case with this sort of design, you are going to have the extra mounting sections here for 120 and 140mm fans. Now, of course, if you want to get a little bit creative with a Dremel or a cutting tool, you could remove those to gain a little bit of extra airflow, but again, potentially you probably won't want to, and do you really need to? Looking towards the back of the case, you can see there is a 120mm addressable RGB fan also, which has got the same sort of design as the front fan to keep a nice cohesive design going all the way through. Although something I did notice, which isn't the end of the world, but certainly for some people might be one of those things which trigger your OCD to levels that have been unseen previously, is the fact that with certain RGB lighting styles, especially ones that rotate, the fan on the back actually rotates in the opposite direction. Now, this isn't a deal breaker by any means, but for some people, yeah, it may be one of those trigger points. Something else towards the bottom there, so you have got a relatively large cutout there for your PSU. I've actually installed a Gamemax PSU in here, which is a RGB one, letting out a little bit of light. I've actually mounted it fan down, which I've actually found with this particular power supply is actually a little bit noisy in there. The fan does make a bit of a weird noise. Possibly if it was turned the other way around, it would let some light bleed through. But overall it fits in there very easily. You can put relatively large power supplies in there. It is sunk back a little bit as well, so if you have got a specific logo on your power supply that you want to see, just remember it is going to be about an inch or so back from the actual cutout. Looking on the back of the PC, and before someone tells me in the comments, yes, I know, I didn't put the I/O shield in, let's not get too bogged down by details. But something we do want to get bogged down in details is something which is somewhat of a pet hate of mine. Now, for cheaper cases, you can let these things slide, but for cases in the kind of £50 and up mark, which is where this currently sits here in the UK, this actually retails at the moment. The cheapest I could find was about £52 from CCL here in the UK, plus a few quid for postage. Generally, it seems to be retailing around the sort of £50 to £55 mark, depending on where you're shopping. But the PCI Express blanking plates aren't removable ones. Well, they are removable, but you can't put them back in. They are the kind of capture ones you fold out, bend off, which kind of is a little bit disappointing for a case in this price point. Around £50 mark is where there is an absolute ton of competition in the market, so really you want to be seeing companies doing that little bit extra. I appreciate they've obviously included 3 addressable RGB fans, 2 of which were 200mm ones, which aren't cheap anyway, and to still come in at around about £50 I think is actually pretty good value for money, especially if you compare it with Gamemax's own F15, which generally retails for around about the £60 mark and is effectively pretty much this case's direct competitor. So anyway, mounting section on the back there for a 120mm fan. Again, with the width of this case coming in at 210mm wide, it would have been nice if they could have actually got a 140 in there as well to give you a little bit of options, but again, I guess it's absolutely fine. Something else which I'm not overly keen on is the retention mounting section here. So there's a screw there and there's a panel which slides out to hold your cards in place. You can use screws as well, which I've chosen to do. Again, it's just a little bit on the cheap side. Moving around to the back of the case, so nothing very exciting here. We've just got a standard flat panel finished in a satin matte black finish. The side panel itself is actually very difficult to get off, and because it uses that kind of wedge technique, it is actually quite tightly in there, so you're not going to get any rattles or knocks and that sort of thing, or vibrations from fans. So looking in the back now, you can see obviously there is a build in here, so it is going to be a little bit messy. I've shot some B-roll previous to this with it empty, so we can get a bit of a closer look. But generally going through a tour, so pass-throughs at the top, we've got a large one here for the main I/O bunch of cables and also the RGB controls. Another one here for fans, etc. And there is the EPS connection hole there. Again, a little bit on the small side, you can pretty much get a finger in there with cables in, but it is quite a tight squeeze in there, so yeah. You may find that with some PSUs you want to break the 8-pin connector into half into the 2 4s, just so you can get it through there, or possibly with some other types of modular setups, maybe pass the cable through first before you actually put your motherboards and other types of cooling stuff in there. Otherwise you may find it a bit of a squeeze, especially if you've got a radiator in there. Huge cutout on the back for access to the CPU backplate, so if you are using custom cooling, you've got nice easy access. If you've got like a Cooler Master type cooler and they've got that custom backplate, easy access to tighten it up, all that sort of thing if it ever comes loose. Down the side, we've got lots of areas for putting cabling and also cable ties, punch outs, etc. At the bottom, there is a very small, very basic rack for putting a 3.5 inch drive in there. You can put two in there, mount one on top, one on the bottom, or you can put a 3.5 and a 2.5 drive if you wanted to. There's also two removable sleds here, so these are on thumb screws, and you can just lift those out, put another two 2.5 inch drives on there. Next to that, there is the addressable RGB controller, which is included as part of the package. That has got 6 ports for RGB outputs. Also, it's got 2 custom type outputs for RGB strips. So if you want to add those in, you can do, but you will have to use Gamemax's ones or repin existing ones. It also will connect up to 5 fans. Whether or not you'd want to, I don't know. It is PWM control. Although, well, the plug is PWM control and it is SATA powered, which is always nice to see. The PWM control I found on this particular Asus motherboard it didn't like at all, so I had to switch it to DC output, which actually makes sense because the connections on the side for the actual fan headers are all 3-pin apart from the bottom 2. So yeah, your mileage may vary. I would say if you're looking at changing any fans, then probably you want to look at a different case anyway, because the real kind of main selling point of this is the fans that are included anyway as part of the price. The RGB controller, if you want to remove it, you can do. There's just a single thumb screw on the top. You can slide that up and it comes out in one whole unit. So potentially if you didn't want it, you could take that out, sell it on, etc. There's no specific software or hardware that is necessary. The only thing that you will need is a PWM controller header for a motherboard, power. It does go to a switch on the top, and also there is a custom, well, semi-custom addressable RGB output, which is the Aurora Sync port, they call it here. So you've got your traditional 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB. Plenty of room at the bottom for the power supply, like I said before, and there's actually a reasonably decent gap there. So if for some reason you put your power supply in and you forget to plug in your HD audio connection, then you can pass that through quite easily. It's very simple, so no worries there. Something we should take a look at as well is the accessories which are included with the case when you buy it. So actually there's some pretty cool things here which I quite like to see. Rather than actually sending out cable ties, they've actually sent out twist sticks, which actually is a really good thing because these are clearly reusable. You just twist them on and untwist them to use them. So, and actually not wasting plastics with cable ties where you have to generally snip them, then that's actually quite a nice inclusion. So glad to see those. There's also the addressable RGB cable, as we've said about for the Aurora Sync controller. So this is just your 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB pass-through header, and you've got a couple of male-to-male connectors there to connect it all up to whatever you want to connect it to. There's obviously an instruction guide and tells you how about installing the actual RGB controller, which is pretty much straightforward. You do get included a bag of screws as well, so that's something I get asked a lot. Mike, does the case actually come with all the screws and fixings to actually put a motherboard in? Yes, it definitely does. This one actually came with a spare rubber grommet as well, so for holding the glass panel in on the side, which yeah, I guess you might lose one of those one day, so it's nice to have. But something which is actually really cool is there is a GPU bracket in here. So this actually goes on the inside, is adjustable, so you can adjust the length of it, and this will stop GPU sag. So if you're thinking about doing a slightly older PC build in here, maybe you've got an old graphics card and it's starting to sag a little bit, then this can certainly give it a little bit of an uplift. Looking on the bottom of the case, again, not brilliant, but it does the job. So you have got a removable filter there, which is one of those typical kind of flimsy sheet material things. Hexagonal mesh on the bottom, which is good for airflow, that's all good. 2 screws on the bottom, so if you do want to take out the hard drive rack, you can do, and put the hard drive in separately outside of the case, which some people may find easier, although you can slot a drive in quite easily with it actually still installed. You can't actually move the cage further forward or back. There's no other options than the place that it actually physically sits in. Also, you can see here we've got the feet, which are actually raised up quite a bit, about an inch off the deck, and there's foam padding on there to stop vibrations going through to your desk. Looking at the top of the case, so we've got a removable mesh filter, very standard, magnets hold it in place. Hexagonal mesh again, which is always nice to see. There is, as you can see, a really big offset, so you can get an idea of actually what kind of stuff you can install in here. So again, a 240mm rad in the top here should be actually okay. With this motherboard, it will clear the VRMs very easily and the RAM, but again, we have chosen to go with Corsair's LPX. If you've got RGB RAM in there, you may struggle, so obviously do bear that in mind. Moving towards the front, so we've got power button, reset switch. Next to that, there is an illumination switch. Now this actually adjusts the brightness, so there's 4 stages of brightness for the actual fans, so that's actually something quite unusual, don't often see that, but it is included. And of course, if you don't like RGB, you can just press the button a few times and it turns it off entirely. Next to that is a mode button, so if you don't want to connect it up to your motherboard, or maybe you've got a motherboard which doesn't support addressable RGB, you can press that and cycle through the various colours. Something which struck me as being a little bit unusual with that is the fact that there aren't many static colours. So if you wanted to go with a monochrome white build, for instance, then you press it and that isn't an option. It really isn't, so you'd have to control that through your motherboard. There are some nice patterns built in, which we'll take a look at shortly, but sadly, some of the statics are limited to pretty much either red, green or blue. Next up, we've got separate microphone and headset jack, so that's always quite handy. I don't like the combo jacks, they're a little bit on the fiddly side. Obviously, if you've got a headset which doesn't have a combo included, then you're kind of stuffed. Next up, there is a single USB 2.0 and a USB 3.0. That in itself, I would have liked to have seen probably both of those being USB 3, just in case. I get where this is coming from, obviously cost savings. It does actually make it a little bit more helpful when it comes to cable management, because the dual USB 3.0 cables can be a little bit fiddly to route around in your case depending where they are, so it does help in that regard. So now we've got the PC turned on, so we can take a look at the RGB lighting and also look at the setup. So the setup we've got in here is a Ryzen 5 3600. There's also a GTX 1066 gig, which was kindly donated by William Bodie. Thank you very much for William Bodie. I've basically designed this in mind with kind of the most common parts that are used on the market at the moment, especially if you look at the Steam hardware survey. So we've got the Wraith RGB cooler, which I think actually looks really nice and ties in really nicely with the lighting style. Kind of gives it that nice cohesive look. And again, it's something that a lot of people are going to have. Processor, again, Ryzen 5 3600, very, very popular, very, I don't want to say common, but it is quite common. There's a lot of them around. LPX RAM, very popular. And the graphics card, the 1066 gig, is pretty much #1 on the Steam charts. So this is very much the kind of everyman type PC, which is why we've used this to get the temperature tests, etc. Before we go looking at the temperature test, we'll go quickly through the lighting styles. So you can press the button on the top. This one actually controls the brightness of the LEDs, which I'm not really sure if that's something which is actually useful. Let me know in the comments. Is this something that you'd actually use? Maybe if you've got your PC on in a bedroom or something and you want to go to bed at night, but you're leaving the PC on, that could be quite handy just to kill off the RGB. Okay, let me know what you think. The button next to it goes through the various modes, so you've got all the usual kind of unicorn puke modes and various combinations thereof. You can probably see now, and maybe for some B-roll, the fact that the kind of the blue is going around that way on these fans, and on the back fan is going the opposite way, which, yeah, it isn't the end of the world, but it could be annoying for some people. So again, you've got various options of lighting. That is one of the statics. And trying to find a static white on here is almost impossible. There are some nice options in there, but doesn't appear to be an option to actually pause it. So when it's doing this kind of thing, it'd be nice if you could actually just pause the light in, but it doesn't seem that there is an option to do that. So there is some limitations from the addressable RGB controller. Ideally, I would say best case scenario, do you want to connect it to your motherboard and your software, so MSI Center, all those kinds of things. So yeah, you get the general idea. It's yeah, controllable from the button there. You can choose various styles which you may or may not like. So let's take a look at some of the temperature tests. So what I've done with temperature test wise, I've done it with the front panel on and with the front panel off, and I've done separate testing for the CPU under stressful loads and the GPU under stressful loads, or kind of gaming scenarios, which I think is, again, what most people are going to be looking at. So if you're using this for maybe video editing or rendering purposes, you're going to want to know what it's going to be like. If you're just going to use it for gaming, you want to know what that's going to be like. So anyway, let's take a look at some of the results. So first of all, we've got the tests for the CPU. Now this is with the front panel attached, and the CPU test, we've got some highs and lows. Now I'm not going to go through in great depth on these and call them out, because obviously you can read them on the screen. But essentially what we've got is pretty much average results, what I'd kind of expect for this. Now if we take a look at the results with the front panel actually removed, so the temperatures have definitely dropped. So we're dropping somewhere in the region of an average of about somewhere between 3 to 5 degrees on average, which is kind of what you'd expect from pretty much any front panel. So it doesn't appear that the system is getting choked off, especially when it comes to CPU tests. So let's take a look now at the graphics card test and see if it makes any difference there. So again, we got pretty much exactly the same deal here. So this is with the front panel on. We can look at the numbers there, and then we'll take a look again after with the front panel off. And again, you've got pretty much exactly the same kind of result. So it's about 4 or 5 degrees difference. It isn't a great deal. And certainly I've seen other cases which have appeared to be less restricted, but actually do considerably worse. So in my opinion, even though this is a solid glass front panel, it does appear to breathe very nicely. When it comes to actual physical results, i.e. performance, what you can see when you're actually using it. So let's take a look first of all at the CPU stress tests. So this is using Cinebench R23 and just doing a quick loop just to see what it is like, letting it cool down and then redoing it. So as you can see with the front panel on, we've got a result of 9,184 points. And with the front panel off, we've got 9,217 points. So not a very big difference. And I did run it again a few times just to see, and it basically turns out the same all the time. There's basically nothing in it. So in terms of CPU performance, yeah, you're not going to notice any problems at all. Where it got a little bit weird and a little bit interesting is when we did the GPU test. Now this is using the Heaven benchmark, which isn't overly stressful, but is a relatively good indicator of what gameplay is going to be like for the majority of users. So with the front panel actually on, we've got 3,354 points on an average FPS of 133.2. Where it gets weird is with the front panel off and in theory getting more cold air into that graphics card, we actually get a worse result. So we've got just under 3,300 points there, so 3,289, and actually we lost 3 FPS. So bizarrely, it works better when it's hotter, or at least this particular graphics card does. So there we go, there is the Gamemax BLACKHOLE. It is somewhat of an enigma. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. Still, even after doing the tests, it performs well. It does exactly what you expect it to, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if you like this kind of design, and you like 200mm fans, and you like it to be quiet, which is something we didn't actually touch on at all, actually. The 200mm fans, RPM-wise, if you plug them directly into a motherboard, you can get them down to as low as 300 RPM and a maximum of 850 RPM. With the 120mm fans, you're looking at the low of 500 RPM and a maximum of 1350. Now, even with the highest RPM settings, it still is pretty quiet, and in general use, in fact, even now, the loudest thing that I can hear in there is the power supply fan, and also obviously that Wraith cooler, which is a little bit on the noisy side anyway. But certainly at the moment, the Gamemax power supply, yeah, if I put my hand over it, you can hear the difference in the tonal change. So the power supply is actually the one which is the culprit at the moment, making any noise if you're picking it up on your headsets. So yeah, temperature wise does absolutely fine. I don't think this case really would lend itself well to very high performance parts. Now clearly, obviously you can do. If you wanted to put in there a 5950 and a 3090 Ti, you're more than welcome to do so. I don't think many people will. I think it's not really that sort of case, and obviously if you've got that sort of budget, then you're probably going to be spending a little bit more on a case anyway. Maybe one of Gamemax's other cases which may have slightly better airflow. But in terms of your kind of what I would call a everyman sort of build, or just your regular PC gaming build, this is going to be absolutely fine. You aren't going to have any issues with the front panel choking off the system, which is what I initially thought it was. And it's actually one of the reasons why I didn't review this earlier. I have been asked by a number of viewers, Mike, can you take a look at the Gamemax BLACKHOLE? And every time I looked at it, I looked at that front panel and my initial thought was, nope, it's going to be a hot box. I'm not interested. But I'm happy to say, on this occasion, I'm completely wrong. But what I think about the case isn't important. What you think about it is. So let me know what you think. Gamemax BLACKHOLE, is it a win or a lose? Is it something you like? Do you like the look of it? Would you quite happily buy a case with a front panel like this if you knew it could breathe properly? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. So anyway, that's going to wrap this one up for now. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.